that's for sure. Never have to close the door. Been a long time, a year before, and I'm missing you so bad.
Hi guys, welcome back to exmolex. Today we are continuing to read this book, Mormonism and the... If you haven't seen the other parts, check the description to watch those first, and let's get started. Those apologizers and critics who say that the church is unjust in refusing to permit to hold the priesthood might ask themselves this question. In our society today, from which situation is the suffering most? 1, in not being permitted to hold the priesthood in the LDS church, or 2, in having a black skin with other features which stigmatize him in the eyes of most whites? The answer is obvious. There is zero self-awareness here. He really doesn't realize that number 1 is contributing to number 2. And who controls the fact of his having these features? His creator, of course. When God allows a spirit to take on a body, do you suppose he is unaware of the fact that he will suffer a social stigma? God is clearly fine with that. Therefore, if you say this church is unjust in not allowing to bear the priesthood, you must, to be consistent, likewise say that God is even more unjust in giving him a black skin. Yeah, but that's only on the assumption that I believe that the church is true, or believe that this God exists. We might ask, how many of those LDS who criticize the church for not conferring the priesthood upon them have ever made the effort to preach the gospel to them, to bring him into the church, to extend brotherly love and kindness to him? How many non-LDS critics are truly Christian toward I'm sure that the vast majority of people who are upset at the church for discriminating against black people are probably also treating black people kindly. That's just a guess. Is it barely possible that those Mormons and non-Mormons who accuse the church of hypocrisy in this matter are themselves the hypocrites? Let the critic consider another question. Can you name one who has actually suffered by not having the privilege of bearing the priesthood, suffered so far as social stigma or other things of this world? Okay, but do you know any black people who are hurt by this? Since he asked, let's sound off in the comments. If you either are a black person who is affected by this, or you know somebody who is affected by this, leave a comment, let us know. The fact that a white man who clearly is privileged and has the priesthood and wrote this book can sit and say this, like, but do you know any black people that have been hurt by it? Really? Do you know anyone? Maybe you should have let a black person contribute to the book, or just let a black person write the book. Instead of saying, well, nobody's actually been hurt by it. How would you know? You're a white guy. I feel like this man really is lacking empathy. Because even if you believe that the church is true and you believe that following the prophet is the right thing to do you not have any sort of feelings inside yourself where you could say, if I was in this position, would this hurt me in any way? Would this be something that even if I came to accept it, would it be a difficult thing? Would I have a hard time understanding why things are the way that they are? And I feel like most people who have an empathetic response could say, yeah, I could see how that would affect me. And he's just over here like, no. What? No one's hurt by it. Name one person that's actually been hurt. Please. Is it not possible to see an act of mercy on the part of God and not having bear the priesthood in this world in view of his living under the curse of a black skin and other features? When a man has the priesthood conferred upon him, Satan redoubles his efforts to destroy that man. Just think of the weapons, the tools that Satan would have at his command, and the prejudices of the world against Who is to say that, in view of these factors, is not, so far as his temporal well-being, better off not to have the priesthood? God has said that where much is given, much is required. With the social prejudice against him, imagine the obstacles that would encounter in attempting to honor and magnify his priesthood. So he kind of said the same thing in the last part, or maybe the part before that, but it's just ridiculous to me that he can sit here and be like, well, there's so much stigma against black people, and if they had the priesthood, it would just be more difficult for them. No. Are you not considering the fact at all that the church discriminating against black people like this is just adding to stigma? Is just adding to racism? It's just more discrimination? I can't even with this guy. I believe that we should recognize the mercy as well as the justice of God in all things. The very fact that God would allow these spirits who were less worthy in the spirit world to partake of a mortal body at all is further evidence of his mercy. Indeed, are we not all partakers of his infinite mercy and charity? This, to me, genuinely reads like it's satire. It's like when an account on Instagram or something makes like a fake Mormon account to mock Mormonism and tries to think of ridiculous things to say that are clearly not okay. That is what this sounds like, but this guy is 100% dead serious. We should remember that this earth life is but an extremely short, although very important, span of time in the eternal scheme of things. Like others, who makes the most of his opportunities in righteousness in this life, however limited those opportunities may be, will have the privilege of someday bearing the priesthood. In this regard, the prophet Brigham Young said, I have endeavored to give you a few items relating to the celestial kingdom of God and to the other kingdoms which the Lord has prepared for his children. The Lamanites, or Indians, are just as much the children of our Father and God as we are. So also are the Africans. But we are also the children of adoption through obedience to the gospel of his Son. Why are so many of the inhabitants of the earth cursed with a skin of blackness? It comes in consequence of their fathers rejecting the power of the holy priesthood and law of God. They will go down to death, and when all of the rest of the children have received their blessings in the holy priesthood, then that curse will be removed from the seed of Cain, and they will come up and possess the priesthood and receive all the blessings which we now are entitled to. This again goes along with that doctrine of everybody with dark skin someday when they go to heaven will be white and delightsome. Like this idea that there's no people with dark skin in heaven. It's just wild when you think about it, how self-righteous this guy is, how arrogant to believe that white is right, white is light, there will be no people with dark skin in heaven, and Jesus was white, and all of the characters in the Bible were white. Like, it's just sometimes hard to wrap your mind around somebody being so self-centered. I'm believing so strongly that they are so much better than everybody else. In conclusion, 1, in the LDS doctrine regarding we see a vivid illustration of the principles of free agency, foreordination, eternal progress, and the justice and mercy of God. 2, we see the importance of the relationship of premortal life to this life and this life to the next, that the circumstances of our birth into this earth life are determined by our performance in the spirit world, and that our performance here will determine our fate hereafter. 3, we should take warning by this as to the need of our being valiant and anxiously engaged in a good cause, so that we do not forfeit our birthright to annul the gain that we made in the premortal life. 4, while the suffers certain limitations in this world as pertaining to the priesthood and its attendant blessings, he can eventually have the opportunity of enjoying priesthood membership. 5, we should remember that like ourselves, are children of God, our brothers and sisters, that our church has a record of kindliness toward and that whatever prejudice exists against him is in the mind of individuals and certainly does not reflect church policy. 6, there is nothing in church policy that forbids nor discourages us from extending brotherly Christian love to This, however, does not and should not include intermarriage, for we would bring upon our children the curse of Cain, or rather, we would bring unto ourselves children from those spirits destined to be the seed of Cain. 7, we should stand united as members of the church, bearing the gospel of Jesus Christ, not allowing Satan to cause doubt nor contention among us on this or any other issue, for if we know the truth shall make us free from such doubts and contentions. And 8, we should more keenly sense the great opportunity and the tremendous challenge that we have in carrying the gospel to all the world, to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people, sharing its blessings with all who will partake. May God help us to do this. Well, thank Awa. That is it. That is the end of the book. This is a terrible book. That was really rough to get through. If you've been here through all 5 parts of this series, you know just how difficult to get through this has been. I'm really glad it's over, but at the same time, I really do believe that this is important information. This is a glimpse into how the church leaders thought and the way that many Mormons felt before the priesthood ban was lifted. It is really fascinating to me that he provides all these references and has, this way of thinking where he is able to make all of this make perfect sense in his head and still be perfectly reasonable. Like we see here in his little conclusion, the church is completely right. The church is not discriminating in any way. God is absolutely merciful and just to have things laid out the way they are. This is just completely understandable and respectable, and there's nothing racist or discriminatory about this. This is the way things are supposed to be. All is well in Zion. And to an outsider looking in, I just am floored at how racist it is. The quotes that he uses and the scriptures he uses to try to back up his side of the story, to me, do nothing but make it worse. Now, I was born a member of this church. I was raised a member of this church. And granted, that was, several years after the priesthood ban was lifted, but I still heard about this. I didn't hear about all these specific details. I most certainly didn't hear that the church once discouraged people from having interracial marriages. I definitely didn't hear a lot of the worse racist quotes from Brigham Young and others. But at the same time, I really have to ask myself, why didn't you look into this more? Why didn't these things disturb me more? Now, as a Mormon, if I had known that this book existed, and, if I had hopefully been brave enough to actually take the time to honestly read through the whole thing and to look into these things, to hear the quotes from my own prophets that I adored, I really hope that I would have been as disgusted then as I am today. I really hope that I wouldn't have fallen into this mental gymnastics pattern that the author has gotten himself into. Part of what really fascinates me about this book is that just a few years after it was written, the church changed this policy. A lot of what is written in this book, especially when you read the quotes from the prophets and apostles about this doctrine, and he does call it a doctrine, makes it seem so final. Especially towards the end of the book when he talks about someday when everybody dies, Black people will have the priesthood. He makes that seem like, that's it. That's all there is. The priesthood is never going to be given to Black people. And then just a few short years later, under societal and political pressure, okay, Black people can have the priesthood now. I would really like to hear from you guys as we wrap this up. What do you think? What do you think of the author's conclusions? I know some of my audience is older. Were you alive when the priesthood ban was in place? Were you alive when it was changed? How did you feel back then? How do you feel now when you read the words of somebody that was alive then? Somebody that was involved in it, somebody that had a really good workaround for why none of it was wrong. And I especially want to hear from people of color. Whether you're Mormon, whether you're ex-Mormon, whether you were never Mormon. What do you think of this? For me, I feel like this really makes me confront a lot of the beliefs I had as a Mormon. And the church is changing constantly, rapidly. I grew up reading the Book of Mormon and learning that the Lamanites had dark skin and it was a curse, and that when they became good and righteous, their dark skin became white. However, I know now, and I see Mormons talk about it online a lot, that the church is trying to teach that the skin wasn't really skin. They didn't really have dark skin. It was like a metaphor. But I grew up learning that it was their skin. In fact, I had Book of Mormon comic books that depicted the people that way. There is so much of what the church teaches now in its seminary classes, in its institute, and in its Sunday school classes that is completely different from what it was just 10 years ago. And then when you think about what was taught even longer ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, how much has changed? And they will still use these same sort of concepts, but try to spin it in a way that it doesn't seem as bad. This is the reality of what was being taught in the 60s. And they use this content and this doctrine and these scriptures and try to spin them in a completely different way than they were years and years ago. And then think about this book. This is how it actually was. This was what was really being taught in the 60s. And the church whitewashes that now. The church pretends this did not happen. Every racist quote from a church leader is ignored. And if it's brought up in some sort of conversation or online, they dismiss it. They find an excuse for it. They throw it away and act like it was never a problem and it doesn't affect anything and our faith is the same and everything is fine. All is well in Zion. It's really frustrating from the outside looking in. So let me hear your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for sticking with me through this series. It's been a lot. And thank you to my patrons for supporting the channel and helping me get through all this. I really appreciate it. Special thank you to Anthony Guthrie, at Keegar, Craig Call, Doug Davis, Mormonland, The Guiltiest Place on Earth, Jake Nunyabiz, Jason Wilkins, Melissa Jane, Tans, and the Exmo Candle Company for supporting at the Demon tier on my Patreon. If you guys would like to support the channel, you can find links to do so in the description below. I have merch, I have Patreon, I have other things. And even if you can't or don't want to do any of those things, another thing you can do to really help the channel is just leave a like and a comment. Or maybe maybe even share the video. Those things make a big difference in YouTube's algorithm, and this series is difficult for a lot of people to get through, triggering, and I understand why some people wouldn't be as interested in the content, but it is really important. So if you guys learned from this, if you guys think it's important as I do, go ahead and give it a share. I appreciate you sticking with me. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!
Never revealing no secrets you're keeping. These promises strong as a spell. I'll never tell. Yeah,